back to Hardware Unboxed. What are we doing?
I think this is this a bonus episode?
A bonus episode. Do we do those now?
Well, we don't even know when we're filming this whether we'll get to the bonus episode, but
we'll have to do it now.
I guess we're into it.
Yeah. So I guess if they're watching this, we decided that we would do it.
Yep.
Cool. Part 4 Q&As. So there was way too many questions this month. I completely wasted my voice on them. But here we are. So
and we want to answer them.
Yes, we're
not just answering for the sake of it.
Yeah.
There's some good questions we want to get to them. So
it's not because we have to, it's because we want to.
That's right.
Today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description.
Have you guys ever thought about discussing networking type things more in depth? Like, for example, picking commonly used 10 gigabit cards that are cheapish on the market or seeing if they actually reach claimed speeds? Or, discussing budget ways to implement your own 10 gig NAS for YouTube channels and so on. My brother is approaching the 10K subscriber mark and finding it difficult to store everything without breaking the bank. So.
Yeah, well, that's a challenge, isn't it? Really, yeah, expensive hard drives, and then you can build your own NAS for a cheaper solution. But again, it comes back down to having to pay for storage. And yeah, I mean, hard drives are getting bigger and cheaper, but you've still got to spend money to get them. So that was definitely a struggle for us initially as well when we were starting out and the channel wasn't really making money. Storing all your data is difficult. As for have we ever thought about network type content? How should I put this? I really only do networking out of necessity. I don't know about you. Do you enjoy networking related things?
I put networking in the same category as printers, in that I would really rather not have to deal with it.
Printers is
like
well
the garbage tier.
Yeah, printers is well below. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate networking. I love it. Like, I just installed some new 10 gigabit switches, have all my test systems set up to it. I now have moved my Steam library off my computers to a centralized system with some SSDs in it. 8 terabyte SSDs. Can access that at high speed. It's absolutely awesome. I just have to update one source. So I love networking, love what it can do, but I don't love talking about it or getting into it. And look, there's plenty of channels that are significantly more knowledgeable than I am about all things networking. So probably seek them out on YouTube, and it's the way to go. But there's a million different things we could cover. And you'll see other channels like Gamers Nexus doing their fan testing and cases. Doesn't interest me, so we don't do it, but I love watching their content, so it's great that they do it. Tim does his monitors. I get into GPUs and CPUs and all that sort of stuff. But really, there's only one of me, and there's only so many hours in the day that I can stay awake, and I can't do anywhere near all the content I would like to do. There's a long list of Elder Lake related stuff and game testing and all kinds of things I'd love to do. So chucking networking in there, something that I'm not really passionate about and not that knowledgeable about. As I said, it's something I just do out of necessity. I sort of, how do I do this thing, Google? And then I work it out and I do it, and then I never look at it again because it's like, that's done. I hope I never have to look at it again. So anyway, hopefully I've answered that one for you. But save your pennies up for those extra terabytes. How long does it take for you to write an article for TechSpot? Well, I think the writing part is probably one of the shorter parts, right? So we do all the testing, then we script it together, which for me is usually a couple of hours. Depends how long the script is, I suppose. Like usually they're around 2,000 to 3,000 words, a couple of hours of research and writing, tying it all together, and then, So, and as far as the TechSpot article part goes, well, we just submit our script these days. So it's what we're doing anyway. We don't really do too much work to make a separate script for TechSpot. It's pretty close to
what we say, which maybe you've noticed if you read the articles.
There's a lot of people that think that TechSpot or Hardware Unboxed are plagiarizing one or the other. But yeah, same authors. Memory timings. I noticed most benchmarks, including your latest of the new Battlefield game on YouTube, only show results for 1080p gaming. Is that because it doesn't really affect performance at higher resolutions akin to the CPU at higher res? And I assume if that's the case, using 4 versus 2 sticks has the same answer. Thanks, I'm your question asker, Tim. I'll see you next one. Very clever. So this is ultimately talking about CPU, GPU bottleneck type stuff. So when we're looking at memory performance, which is essentially CPU performance, we're looking at CPU performance because faster memory will allow the CPU to do things faster. And you want to, as best you can, remove the GPU limit or at least minimize it so you can see what kind of performance uplift that'll give you. Now, and again, we do this because we're testing CPU performance. A lot of people argue, why even bother? Like, I don't game at 1080p, I game at 4K, or I do this or I do that. The main reason is to show you what the actual difference is. And while it's true that maybe you game at 4K with ultra quality settings and therefore the CPU and the memory is going to make very little to no difference, there are people that play Rocket League, Counter-Strike, Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, and the list just goes on, where they're using lower quality settings at a lower resolution, trying to drive as many frames as possible. And we saw in Battlefield that, for those people who are dialing down the resolution, or I mean, it even applies to 1440p really, but a lot of people play Battlefield with the low quality preset. And that's because they want to have a competitive edge for one. Using low competitive quality settings does 2 things. First of all, it makes players easier to spot because it turns off shadows in a lot of instances. So there's less stuff all over the screen for your eyes to try and work out what's what. It reduces vegetation quality, so you can see people through trees and shrubs easier. So it does all that visual stuff so you can spot your enemies easier for that competitive advantage, and then it raises frame rates so you get less input latency or delay or whatever you want to call it. So that's why they do it. And therefore, this sort of testing when we test CPUs, CPU becomes probably, I'd say in a lot of those instances, like CSGO, the primary performance limiting component more so than the GPU. Yep. Any mid-range GPU from the last few generations will play CSGO at 600 FPS if you want it to. The CPU is what will hold you back from being able to achieve those frame rates. Same thing with Rainbow Six Siege.
Yep.
Happy with that?
Yep.
Tim's happy. We'll move on. Okay. With Intel's Alder Lake being the first out of the gate with new CPU architecture, and AMD not set to release a new architecture until sometime in 2022, do you see AMD falling behind on CPU innovation and constantly trying to play catch up with Intel? The way the Radeon 6000 series, although being great GPUs, is playing catch up to NVIDIA's DLSS 2.0 and the 2nd gen RTX. Well, you could argue that AMD was first out with a new architecture, and now Intel's finally caught up and doing so with a new manufacturing process, and they're catching up to what Intel's had in the market for a year. What AMD's had, did I say what AMD's had?
AMD's had in the market for a year.
What AMD's had in the market for a year. And then, AMD will release Zen 4 probably late next year, and then it'll be game on. So it's kind of like leapfrogging, basically.
Yeah, that's what I would expect. Leapfrogging, exactly. Yeah. It's you go, it's if a product's already been on the market for a year, and then, so we're talking about Zen 3, and then Intel comes out with Alder Lake a year later, and it's not faster or at least equal to that part, it's a bit of a fail, isn't it? Like really?
Oh yeah. I
really,
thought you were saying that was. Sorry. I thought that you were saying that was the situation. Sorry, go on.
I'm saying this is kind of what we got with Alder Lake, right? It was released a year after.
You're
Zen
saying the expectation is to be better.
So the expectation if you've got a competitor that set the ballpark or set the standard in the market for a year, and you release your product after 1 year, it cannot be slower. Otherwise, it's a fail. It looks embarrassing, right? Yep. So you would expect that. Intel comes out with Alder Lake and it's faster, and then AMD will respond, and then that chip will be faster, and then Intel comes back and responds, and you keep going in a cycle. The only real way that what this question is suggesting could happen is if Intel has a shorter release cadence than AMD. So if AMD is releasing CPUs every, say, 18 months, and Intel updates every 12 months, then Intel can potentially cycle through generations faster and start building up a lead. But again, you would expect that, the CPU battle is so competitive these days that there'd be all sorts of counters from each side. Pricing is a very important aspect to these things as well. There's a lot of things that can be done, and I would expect the CPU market to be very competitive for some time to come, which is great.
Very good. All right, Tim. Whenever I say that, Tim knows I'm palming off a question. No, actually, this is a pretty good question. I think we'll have a good discussion about this one. Does the performance difference between the 12600K and 12900K in gaming have more to do with the cache size or other factors? So, what would you guess?
Well, interesting that you palmed this one off to me, considering all the 12th gen testing that I've done. Loads and loads
it's
of
like
testing.
It's like homework. Have you been watching your Hardware Unboxed content, Tim?
I have. I have been doing my homework. It does appear to be a cache size thing, but I'm guessing that you have a bit more information than I would on this.
Yeah, I have a video, as luck would have it, that I'm working on at the moment. Hopefully it'll be on the channel next week. But yeah, basically it's what we saw with 10th gen, 11th gen. Primarily the cache capacity is the reason why the 12900K is faster than 12600K. So very little to do with cores, especially in today's games. There will be a point in time for sure where those extra cores do make a difference for gaming. But in today's games, very little difference. Like the differences we saw even in a really demanding game like Battlefield 2042 is entirely down to that cache capacity. So yeah, same old story really. But there's some, although it sounds boring and it's, we already knew that, we've done that testing and it makes sense that it applies here. There's some interesting results in that one. So make sure you stay tuned for it. But yeah, mostly cache there. I'd say even the little adjustments in frequency make a bigger difference than the core count. So if you're after a gaming CPU, you want a really powerful, really fast gaming CPU, but you don't want to go into the point of diminishing returns right now, I recommend the 12600K. And I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, that the 12, well, I shouldn't say if ever, because there certainly will be a point in time where the 12700K and 12900K are faster. Whether it happens in the feasible length of that product's lifespan, I don't really know the term to use to describe this. But basically, if you buy, it's like kind of like people argue what's better today, the bulldozer architecture or Sandy Bridge, and it's like, why are you trying to argue that bulldozer has aged better like a decade something later? It's like it lost. It doesn't matter if it's faster in 2030 in a game. It lost. Like you can only. There's like a limit on how long you can make the future-proofing argument for. And I feel like when you get to a decade, you're lost. Like give up, move on. It's no longer future-proof. All right, when do you think ray tracing will become just another quality setting without a massive performance hit? Is it as simple as increasing the number of RT cores, or is there more to it? So I think we've talked about this in the past where, like, you know, when anti-aliasing first came out and it was...
So I guess there's kind of two ways to think about this. There's sort of massive performance hit relative to not running ray tracing at all, or we're talking as in massive performance hit as in turning ray tracing on is now unacceptably slow. Because I think there will always be a performance hit from turning ray tracing on versus not running ray tracing. Yeah. So there's always going to be a big hit, and the only way they could get around that big hit is to massively increase their ray tracing acceleration relative to the rest of the GPU. So by, for example, keeping the same CUDA cores but doubling or tripling the ray tracing cores potentially would make it a lot faster for ray tracing and narrow the hit. But what I think is we're more likely to see is just the GPU overall is getting faster.
Yeah.
Which is going to mean that ray tracing is going to become more usable. So you'll be able to do more ray tracing effects. Ray tracing will run better, but there'll always be that performance hit. And I think the issue that we saw originally was that the ray tracing effects were kind of bad, like did not run well, were very compromised. They did virtually nothing, and the performance hit was massive.
Yeah.
Whereas over time, Ampere has improved that to the point where you can run basic level effects fairly well on high-end GPUs. And now the next step is going to be adding more and more. And game developers have found quite a number of ways to optimize ray tracing over the last 3 years or so, which has been good.
Yeah, it's not that dissimilar to a lot of quality settings. Like you turn shadows off in a lot of games, and the performance uplift is massive with shadows off. But then if you're playing it for the visual experience, no shadows looks terrible. Yeah,
it's like if you made a game that looked like the original Doom today, it would run at like 20,000 FPS, but you don't want that. So I think it's that balance of things. I would like to see some generation go slightly more on the ray tracing cores. I think they could beef that up a little bit more relative to the rest of the GPU. But again, just increasing the entire power of the GPU is going to help a lot as well. And the rumors are saying that next-gen GPUs should be pretty impressive. So maybe that will help ray tracing a fair bit.
All right, Tim. Z690 seems like a fantastic high-end chipset. Pretty good desktop chipset with almost HEDT levels of connectivity. Do you think X570 is left in an awkward spot with its price premium, though being way closer connectivity-wise to B550 than Z590 and Z690? I mean, yeah, it's great what it offers and all that. It's a really high-end platform, premium platform, which makes a lot of sense for like the Core i7 and i9 parts. But obviously we do need those cheaper chipsets. But does it leave AMD's like X570 chipset in an awkward position? I don't think so, because you've still got PCI Express 4.0 there for whatever you need it for, future connectivity or whatever. Still got plenty of USB ports, still enough PCI Express lanes for most mainstream desktop CPUs. And if you don't need any, I doubt you go for Z690. You probably go for like a Threadripper type build. Be good if we had Zen 3 Threadripper. So that's kind of that, really.
Yeah, the way I see it is kind of like it does have a lot of great connectivity, but I don't think the connectivity is really the limiting factor with this platform. It's more the CPU performance. Like HEDT platforms like Threadripper, you've got all this connectivity. You've got big, lots and lots of PCIe lanes. You've got lots of memory channels, but also the CPU is like 32, 64 cores. It's a really beefy chip designed for production work where you're most likely going to be using lots of SSDs that might need lots of PCIe lanes and so on. Whereas Z690, it's like the CPU performs well, but it's not significantly faster than a 5950X. So it's like, how do you need a ton of PCIe lanes for like a consumer desktop platform? It's like,
I guess you have to work out like, isn't it? Where for workloads would you use, because gaming is obviously off the,
it's not relevant for gaming.
Not relevant for gaming. So you've really got to be talking about productivity. And it's like, so where does a 12900K make more sense than a 5950X or a 3970X, like a Threadripper part? And it's like, what, like music production maybe, like where single threaded stuff. But then do you need Gen 5 or Gen 4, PCIe storage for music production?
Yeah, I would think that the benefit to PCIe at the moment really seems like it's for server workloads, like where you are absolutely slaughtering your SSD non-stop, then you need that. Whereas, again, we don't know whether this is going to be advantageous in the future or not. It may be, but to me, it seems like in most workloads you would consider using this level of CPU for, the CPU is going to be the main limiting performance factor, not the level of storage speed that you can get or PCI connectivity to your GPU, because GPUs don't even support PCI 5.
It's great that the platform's feature rich with all these new technologies, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really. X570, you're looking at a completely different thing, really.
Yeah, the biggest one is really the DDR5, which can have benefits some of the time, depending on the game and application. Of course, if your application really benefits from it, then that's going to be great. But again, it's...
Yeah, a DDR5 will obviously be a big deal in years to come, but not right now.
It feels more like a step up in the mainstream desktop platform rather than an HEDT equivalent, at least to me.
Yep. All right, another one here from C Money. If price was no object, at what point would you suggest buying DDR5 in terms of speed and timings? So, hard to say because I haven't tested it. Yeah, it's really hard to say. Like, obviously, if DDR5 was offering, let's just throw it out there, like when CPU limited 20% more performance in games, then you'd pay at least 20% more for that. But, is that performance uplift worth 30% or 40% more money? It's hard to say. But as for like me saying, it's going to be DDR5 7000 CL30 or something like that, no idea. We'll have to wait. I haven't even done any basic memory scaling with DDR4 and the DDR5 we have available yet, so I can't really give you a good answer on that one. All right, what are your thoughts on potentially including more detailed power testing for CPUs in reviews? Does it make sense to include categories such as idle power, consumption under light browsing, video playback, lightly threaded productivity tasks, and moderate to heavy gaming, along with the usual all-core workloads? Yep. I know about all those workloads. Idle power's probably worth including. Maybe we haven't. I thought I did it recently, but maybe I didn't. I've got the data. Maybe I should have included it. But as for like light work, browsing, general usage, and all that stuff, not sure how much it matters for the CPU reviews that we're doing. It's really, I've started including CPU power when gaming, and then obviously CPU power when doing core heavy productivity workloads. But yeah, I don't know. It seems more like a laptop type thing.
Yeah, probably. I mean, you have to think, why would you need to know, apart from for science related things,
Yeah.
what's the advantage of knowing the power consumption during light workloads? And I guess it's normally you want to know power consumption because you need to figure out what PSU you need, figure out what sort of cooling you need, how much heat is this thing going to be dumping into my room. Those are the sort of things that you'd be learning about. Whereas with light workloads, it's like, well, you're using the CPU at like 10, 20%. So your power consumption is going to be much lower. So that doesn't tell you what PSU you need. It doesn't tell you the cooling. It's only really telling you the
I guess
heat,
the thing is, it's like if the 5600X was using 20% less power than the 12600K for lighter workloads, which wouldn't be the case. I'm just giving an example.
Yep.
So is it like, although the peak power usage is similar, when they're under less load, this one's more efficient? How much do you really care? Like the power usage would be pretty low at that point. So
I understand that it would be nice to have more data, but I kind of think as well that most people probably wouldn't be using that for any buying decision. It would be more like a sort of like a for science. Like, I guess it's nice. It would be nice if, say, the AMD CPU or the Intel CPU was more efficient in light workloads. But are you going to buy the CPU for that, or are you going to buy it for its performance and value?
And it seems like most people care about the peak power because they just want to know how hard it is to cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Less about what it does to their power bill. All right, Tim, what do you think about the absence of 1440p 24-inch IPS monitors in the high refresh rate / gaming market? Higher resolutions exist at 27 inches and above, and even on laptops with smaller screens, but not at 24 inches. Do you think they could be viable?
Well, I'm sure they could be made. I don't think there's any technical reason why you couldn't have a 24-inch 1440p high refresh rate monitor. I think it's just one of those things where companies do their research into what categories people buy. And I think there's generally a trend for people wanting to buy larger monitors. And I think the only reason we see, say, 24-inch 1080p monitors being popular is that they're very affordable. So when you're sort of in that cheaper range and you can sort of save a few dollars, and 1080p is kind of a nicer resolution at a smaller size, I think it makes sense there. But I think if you had a 24-inch 1440p monitor, how many sales is it going to get versus a more common 27-inch size? Like a lot of people these days have this space for a 27-inch. They appreciate it. It's a bit larger. It's a bit clearer for gaming. And yeah, I just don't think they would sell that well. So that's probably explains why we don't see those currently.
Okay, that is definitely it. We are through the monthly Q&A of November 2021. It's officially over.
I think we answered 2 to 3% of the questions that we got.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, there was a lot. There was definitely a lot, which is great. It's absolutely great to see. And it's good because we've sort of got our pick of all the good ones and you guys upvote the good ones, which forces us to answer them even if we don't want to. And yeah, that was really good. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm exhausted though. I could do with a bit of an afternoon nap before I get into the editing while Tim drives home.
Fun times.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you everyone who did watch, especially if you watched all 4. That is a Herculean effort.
Nice.
Good job. We should be paying you, I suppose. But if you want to pay us, we have Floatplane and Patreon, and that'll allow me to buy some Z690 motherboards because those suckers are not cheap. They're not as bad as MacBooks, but they're up there. So,
well, what's the conversion rate on Z690 motherboards to MacBooks?
Well, it depends how many you have to buy, which is quite a few probably.
It's probably 10 motherboards to a MacBook is kind of the going rate maybe.
Yeah.
$400 a motherboard. The MacBook was about $4,000.
We'll firm that currency up afterwards. We'll work on it. But anyway, Floatplane, Patreon, if I haven't plugged those already, enough. If you want to sign up, links are in the video description to get access to Discord server. Tim and I chat on there with you guys. Monthly live stream. We chat with you guys live. That's always fun. Behind the scenes content, Q&As, a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. But if not, as always, perfectly fine.
I'm your Tim.
I'm your Steve. We got
See
in
you in the next
so
one.
quick on that one.
I know. Nice.